Hey, what's going on, guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, I just wanted to respond to a question that was posted in the Zombie Guitar members Facebook group. And in short, the question is about a chord progression that is taking place. It's in the key of D major. And then there's a solo that's being played over top of the chord progression that's in the key of G major. So the person that's asking this question essentially has two different questions. Number one, why does this sound good together? And number two, is this what modes are all about? So in this video, I'm going to give you my answer to that question along with my reasons why. So before moving on, zombieguitar.com. If you haven't already checked out my website, zombieguitar.com, we're now in the 8th year. The site is constantly growing, and new content is constantly being added. New members are constantly joining. People are loving this zombieguitar.com. So if you haven't already checked it out, stop by, check it out. Let's get on to the lesson. All right, so the chord progression in question is from a song called My Baby Drives a Freight Train by the Howlin' Dogs Skiffle Band.
That's pulling freight that earns my woman's pay.
So it's a D major to a B minor to an E minor to an A major. All of those chords are found in the key signature of D major. That would be a 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression in the key signature of D major. So then the solo kicks in right away, and it's actually played on a harmonica. But the harmonica that's used is a G major harmonica. So I'm not a harmonica player, so forgive me if what I'm saying here is not 100% accurate to how harmonicas work. But my understanding is that there's different harmonicas, and each one is tuned to a major scale. So you may have a C major harmonica, and a G major harmonica, and a D major harmonica, and an A major harmonica. So each of these harmonicas, if I was to just pick up the G major harmonica, that's going to be tuned to a G major scale. So if you blow into that harmonica, it's going to play G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Those are your 7 available notes on a G major harmonica. Now, there's techniques that you can do on a harmonica. You can bend to get other notes. You can inhale and exhale into a harmonica to get different notes and stuff like that. Again, I'm not a harmonica player. I don't fully understand how this stuff works. But again, my understanding is that there's a C major harmonica, G major, D, like one for each of the 12 possible major scales. So in this song, the person's using a G major harmonica played over a D major chord progression. Why wouldn't they just pick a D major harmonica to play over a D major chord progression? And the answer is, well, this is just one of the things that harmonica players do. This is like a blues technique. So the person asking this question is thinking, all right, well, instead of saying that this is a G major harmonica being played over this D major chord progression, can't we just call this G major harmonica by another one of its mode names? Because every major scale has 7 possible modes to it. So can't we just take this G major harmonica and then just, instead of saying that G is the tonic note, let's just say that D is the tonic note and then call it by its D mode name, which happens to be mixolydian. If that's confusing to you as of this point, bear with me. We will be getting into all this stuff in this video, but this is where this question is coming from. So you have this chord progression that's in the key of D major. You have this harmonica that's being played that's tuned to G major. But if you kind of rearrange the notes of the G major scale such that D is your tonic note, your root note, your 1, this would be a D mixolydian harmonica. The D mixolydian scale is the same 7 notes as the G major scale. All right, so now this is starting to make a bit more sense. So we have a D mixolydian harmonica being played over a D major chord progression. So why does this sound good? I don't know. If it sounds good, go with it. Doesn't matter what the theory is. All that matters is, does it sound good? Yes? Cool. Then it's legit. Does it not sound good? No? Don't play it. That's literally the number 1 rule. Number 2, is this modes? Is this where modes apply? So my answer to that question is no. That's not really what modes are. This is just a matter of playing a different scale over a chord progression. So the chord progression is really the driver of the bus. The chord progression makes all the calls. The chord progression dictates the mode. The chord progression tells the lead guitar player what they're supposed to be doing. Does that mean that the lead guitar player is always going to follow that? No. Does that mean that the lead guitar player has to follow the rules? No. I could take this D major chord progression and I could solo over top of it using any scale I want, even though the chord progression's dictating to me like, hey, you should be playing the D major scale if you want to stay in key. That's what the chord progression's telling me. Me as a lead guitar player, I could be like, well, I'm going to play the D harmonic minor scale, or I'm going to play the D whatever double harmonic minor scale, or I'm going to play the D mixolydian scale, or I'm going to play whatever. Like, I'm just going to not listen to what the chord progression is telling me to do, and I'm just going to play a different scale over it, and that's what's happening here. So is this modes? Not necessarily. So that's the big thing to understand here. There's scales and then there's modes. Let's talk about that. So to understand the difference between scales and modes, first let's look at the G major scale, for example. So I'm just going to play the G major scale like this. I'm going to start on the 3rd fret of the low E string and play this. That's the G major scale. If I want to play the G major scale spanning across 2 octaves, I could do that. All right, so what I just played right there, regardless of whether I just played it in 1 octave or 2 octaves or spanning across all 6 strings, what I was playing right there was just the G major scale. So there's nothing really modal about that. It becomes a mode once you add a rhythm section to it. All right, so modes is not just about the scale portion. A lot of people think that it's just about the scale portion. Modes is about the scale portion, aka the melody, and then the chords, the underlying rhythm chords, aka the harmony. You put all that together to produce a sound, and that sound is the mode. So let's now take this G major scale. I'm going to actually just look at it over the entire fretboard, because it's just 7 notes. It's the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. So I can play any of those 7 notes anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar, and if I play those notes over a G major chord, now I have a rhythm section. So I have a soloing framework, and then I have a rhythm section to play this soloing framework over. So let's listen to what that sounds like. All right, so what if I want to play a different mode of this G major scale? So a different mode is not only going to have a different note that is your tonic note, you know, your tonal center of the scale, but it's also going to have that underlying rhythm chord, because a mode is the harmony and the melody put together to create a sound, right? So the 5th mode of the G major scale is the D mixolydian mode. Why is that? Well, if you look at the notes of the G major scale, your 5th note is the note D. So starting on G, here's your G major scale. Starting on the 5th note, so that's my new 1. So starting on that note, which is the note D, moving through the scale pattern until I get to the next D, that's the D mixolydian scale. G major scale, also known as the G Ionian scale. D mixolydian scale. All right, so that's all well and good, but that's just scales. We just played the mixolydian scale there. We want to play the mixolydian mode. Remember, there's scales and there's modes. Modes, you have the scalar framework, the notes that you're using to improvise with or write solos with, and then you have the underlying rhythm section. So what is going to be the underlying rhythm section in order to get the mixolydian mode sound out of this key signature? Well, you look at the 7 chords that are found in the key of G major. G major is your 1 chord, A minor is your 2 chord, B minor is your 3 chord, C major is your 4 chord, D major is your 5 chord. We're focused on 5, right? Mixolydian is 5. We started on the 5th note of the G major scale. That's the starting note of the mixolydian mode for this key. The 5th chord is going to be the chord that we use as our rhythm section, and then we're just going to play these 7 notes anywhere, you know, the 7 notes of this key signature, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. Played those notes over a D major chord in the rhythm section. The sound produced is going to be the mixolydian mode sound. So in both of those examples that I've played so far, the first one was a G Ionian mode example. The second one was a D mixolydian mode example. In both examples, what I was playing as the lead guitar player, my soloing framework was just the 7 notes of the G major scale. That is our parent major scale. I was only playing the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. I was not playing any other notes. The reason that they sounded different was one was played over a G major chord, therefore producing the Ionian mode sound, and then the other one was played over a D major chord, therefore producing the mixolydian mode sound of the key signature. Let me quickly just play each of those back to back so you can hear what the Ionian mode sounds like in comparison to the mixolydian mode. So things tend to get a bit more confusing and open to a lot more interpretation when we start introducing chord progressions into the rhythm section. Previously, our rhythm section was just limited to one single chord. Each mode of a key signature equates to just one single chord. But when you have an entire chord progression happening in the rhythm section, that's where it gets that's like a gray area. So for the first example, we're going to play a chord progression that's in the key of G major. Everything we're doing is going to be in the key of G major. The soloing framework that I play over top of this chord progression is only going to contain notes from the G major scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. The chord progression is going to be a G major chord to a D major chord to a C major chord. That's the 1 chord, the 5 chord, and the 4 chord in the key of G major. Some of these leads may sound a little bit like the Knockin' on Heaven's Door solo, the Guns N' Roses version. That's because that's the exact chord progression that's used in that song. So if it sounds a little Slash-like, but not quite as good, then, Slash is one of my favorite guitar players. So some of my licks may tend to sound a little slashy. Anyway, listen to this first example, and then we'll talk about it. So technically, from a theoretical standpoint, the G major chord was representing the Ionian mode. The D major was representing the mixolydian mode. The C major chord was representing the Lydian mode, because each of the chords within a key signature represents a mode. But that's kind of like, that's adding a lot of unnecessary thinking, a lot of just like, you don't really need to do that. It's much, much, much easier just to be like, oh, that key signature is in the key of G major. We don't need to think about modes. You can if you want to, but you really don't have to. Also, when it comes to these chord progressions, a lot of times they'll just say, okay, well, which one of those chords was the tonal center? Which one of those chords is considered to be the home chord? Most people would probably agree that the G major chord was the tonal center or the home chord. Therefore, we can say that this chord progression as a whole is called an Ionian chord progression. But again, it's subject to interpretation. There's 3 chords happening. Someone else may hear that chord progression and they may think that because the C major chord lasted, 2 bars, whereas the other chords lasted only 1 bar, they may say, well, I think that's a Lydian chord progression. And they wouldn't be wrong. It's open to interpretation. Let me give you another example, and this is what I would consider to be more of a D mixolydian chord progression. I'm going to use the exact same 3 chords that I just did in the rhythm section. So to my ears, that sounded like a D mixolydian chord progression. To me, it sounded like the D major chord of those 3 chords that were being played in the rhythm section was the tonal center. Therefore, I'm saying that was a D mixolydian chord progression. Someone else may come along and they may hear it differently. Someone else may come along and say, no, it sounds like the G major chord was the tonal center to me. Therefore, that's a G ionian chord progression. Neither one of us are going to be wrong, you know? It could be G ionian, it could be D mixolydian, it could be C Lydian. The soloing framework remains exactly the same. We're just using the 7 notes from the G major scale as our soloing framework. It's really up to interpretation of what the listener hears. Again, I'll play both of these back to back for you so you can compare what I consider to be a G Ionian chord progression to a D Mixolydian chord progression, both of which share the exact same 3 chords in the rhythm section. Alright, so with all that said, let's now address this question that was asked in the Facebook group. So, the chord progression in question is in the key of D major. The chords are D major, B minor, E minor, A major. Alright, so those are the 4 chords. So, if you look at your circle of fifths, you can see that these all fall right into the grouping of 6 together. That tells you these are all part of the same key signature. So now let me just give you a quick example of this chord progression being played in the rhythm section, and then I'm just noodling over top of it using the D major scale. The chord progression's in the key of D major. My soloing framework is going to be the D major scale. The 2 are going to go together because everything's in key, and it's going to sound like this. So that's what it sounds like when you have a chord progression that's in the key of D major and then a soloing framework of the D major scale being played over top of it. The 2 things go together and they sound good because everything's in the same exact key. But this example, they throw a curveball. We have this chord progression that's in the key of D major. This harmonica player comes along and he's playing in the key of G major. Alright, so it still sounds cool, and that's fine. Like, theoretically, it doesn't matter. If it sounds good, then it's legit. If it doesn't sound good, then don't do it. That's the #1 rule. Music theory is just trying to provide explanations of why certain things sound cool and why certain things don't sound good. That's all music theory is. So, this guy comes along with his G major harmonica, playing it over this D major chord progression, and instead of calling it a G major harmonica, why don't we just call it by another one of its modes? You know, we could call it G Ionian harmonica, we could call it an A Dorian harmonica, we could call it a B Phrygian harmonica, we could call it a C Lydian harmonica, we could call it a D Mixolydian harmonica. That one would make the most sense, right? D Mixolydian, because now we have a D type of harmonica played over a D type of chord progression, right? So now that makes a bit more sense. So this person's playing a D Mixolydian harmonica over a D major chord progression. So the big question here, is this what modes is all about? And again, my answer is no, not really. This is just a case of someone's playing a different scale over a chord progression. The chord progression is always the driver of the bus. The chord progression always tells you what you're supposed to be doing. The chord progression in this case is saying, we're in the key of D major. The chord progression is also saying, if you wanted to kind of get really, really nerdy about it and really kind of overcomplicate things, but still be correct. The chord progression is telling you this is D ionian, then it's moving to B aeolian, then it's moving to E Dorian, then it's moving to A mixolydian. All right, so that's what the chord progression is saying. The lead guitar player or the lead harmonica player or the lead whatever player could either choose to listen to what the rhythm section is saying, or they can kind of break the rules, and that's what's happening here. The harmonica player is saying, yeah, that's great, I'm just going to play D mixolydian over the entire thing because I think that sounds good, and that's what my harmonica playing buddies have always done, and this is the sound we're used to, so that's what we're going to do here. It's a case of playing a different scale over a chord progression, and that's what's going on there. So just to try and replicate this a bit, I'm going to take that same exact chord progression that I just played right there, and I'm now going to solo over top of it using the D mixolydian scale, and it's going to sound like this. So you can see how this stuff is very, very, it's definitely a gray area with all this stuff. Like if I was in real life and I was just jamming at like with a bunch of musicians and stuff, and I'm strumming a chord progression in the key of D major, and a harmonica player came along and was like, hey, I'm going to play the D mixolydian mode over top of that. I'm not going to yell at the guy. I'm not going to be like, it's a scale, it's not a mode, it's the D mixolydian scale, it's not the D mixolydian mode. Like, I know what the guy's talking about. This is really like the semantics that we're arguing, modes versus scales. But when we're learning this theory stuff for people that don't like fully understand modes and they're still trying to wrap their head around all this stuff, I think it's very, very important to make this distinction. You have to understand the difference between just a scale and a mode. A mode is just a rearrangement of a key signature. It contains all of the same stuff from the original key signature, all of the same chords, all of the same notes. You're just shifting around the tonal center within the key signature. That's what a mode is. But they can also be used as scales, like the Dorian scale or the mixolydian scale or the Phrygian scale or whatever. They also can be used as scales. And in this particular case, we have a chord progression in the key of D major. Someone comes along and they're like, I'm playing the D mixolydian scale over top of that. Cool, no problem, man. Sounds good to me. Keep doing it. Someone could come along and say, yeah, I want to play the D Dorian scale over top of this. That might sound cool. Someone might come along and they say, I want to play the D Phrygian scale over top of this. That may sound cool too. They're just playing a different scale over a chord progression that is theoretically telling you what to do. You can choose to listen. You can choose not to listen. As long as it sounds good, then it's good. So anyway, so that's what I have to say about that question. I hope this was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions or need any further clarification about this, feel free to ask. See you next time. Thanks for watching.